Israel is suspending the licenses of 37 international aid groups working in Gaza and the West Bank. The Israeli government says the NGOs have failed to comply with new registration rules that require detailed information on all staff members. The groups are a lifeline for Palestinians who are in desperate need of food, medical supplies and shelter after Israel's bombardment of the enclave. Among the organizations banned are Doctors Without Borders and the Norwegian Refugee Council. Joining us now from Paris is Claire Sanfilippo. She's the head of emergency operations for Gaza with Doctors Without Borders. And Shayna Lowe is a communication advisor with the Norwegian Refugee Council. She joins us from Jerusalem. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Shayna, let me start with you. Now, your organization is among those 37 groups that have been banned by Israel from working in Gaza. Israel says these groups, including yours, have not complied with its new rules to supply personal information on those who work for you. The Israelis say this is to prevent the groups from being infiltrated by Hamas. How has this ban affected your operations? Have you now completely stopped operating in Gaza?
No, of course not. First of all, even the expiration of our registration, which is what's happened, we have a 60-day period to wind down. But this isn't the first obstruction that we faced by Israel. We're going to continue operating as much and as long as we can. Our teams on the ground throughout the occupied Palestinian territory are committed to continuing to respond to communities in need. So far, what we've seen as an impact is that international aid workers are not able to enter Gaza. So the internationals who have been supporting our local staff will no longer be able to enter. Already for 10 months, Israel has blocked all of our aid from directly bringing in our aid into Gaza. And so we anticipate that this will continue, of course, but our teams continue to respond, supporting people by providing over 100,000 people a day with clean drinking water, operating temporary learning spaces for children who were deprived of an education for 2 years, continuing to coordinate the shelter response as the lead agency for the shelter cluster, which is working with all of the different NGOs and the UN, providing shelter response, and much more work that our teams will continue to do despite these obstructions.
What is the aid that your organization is able to get into Gaza right now? Because there are reports that Israel has been blocking some of those aid trucks from crossing the Rafah border.
We have not been able to bring in any aid directly into Gaza since before March 2nd of last year. It's been more than 10 months. So even when we had registration that was intact, even after the ceasefire came into effect about almost 3 months ago, we still were not able to bring in aid. And the reason for the rejection after October 10th, when the ceasefire agreement came into effect, was that we were not authorized. So we saw that even though we had valid registrations, the Israeli authorities were still using the registration process as an excuse to prevent us from bringing in aid. 16 of the 17 rejections that we received since October 10th were based on the fact that we were not authorized to bring in aid. And the 17th rejection just simply said reject.
Claire, Doctors Without Borders is also on that list. How is this ban affecting your medical teams on the ground? I mean, how big a setback is it?
It's a massive setback. I mean, this threat to withhold the registration of Doctors Without Borders, but also other international organizations like NRC, is really a cynical attempt to even further restrict humanitarian services, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, at a time where the humanitarian situation in Gaza is nothing short of catastrophic. And really, right now, the situation is worsened by harsh winds and dropping temperature. So it is extremely cynical. And I think it's also important to state that it is in violation of Israel's international obligations under international humanitarian law, because granting access to humanitarian aid is not optional. It's not a luxury. It is mandatory under international humanitarian law. So very much like NRC, MSF, Doctors Without Borders, continues to work in Gaza, but we've not been able since the beginning of the year to bring in international supplies. We were able to continue to do that until the end of last year, but with numerous and almost systematic blockages or delays from the Israeli authorities. And we've also, since the beginning of the year, not been able to bring in new international stuff. So it is extremely concerning because today Palestinians need more aid, not less aid.
You call this move by Israel a cynical move. The Israelis say they're doing this to prevent infiltration of these groups by Hamas. What is your response to that?
Well, what I can tell you is that, unfortunately, we're now under a defamation campaign from the Israeli authorities, which have accused organizations, including MSF, to hire members of armed groups. And it's very important to categorically refute these allegations made by the Israeli authorities, because we would never knowingly employ anyone involved in military activities. I think it's very easy to understand that it contradicts our core values and ethics, as well as humanitarian principles, but also it would put our patients, our staff, and our activities at risk. We're very concerned that these allegations are being made without any proof, and that they contribute to delegitimizing the critical work that are being done by humanitarian workers, again, at a time where the needs are extremely high.
Shana, it is midwinter right now. It's also the rainy season. Temperatures are dropping across the region. What are your biggest needs right now, and are you able to fulfill some of them?
Shelter is a huge concern, and it's not just about providing emergency shelter. About 1.3 million people remain in need of emergency shelter after 80% of Gaza's buildings were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of housing units damaged or destroyed. It's firstly about getting in emergency shelter supplies, tents, tarpaulins, timber and framing materials, which have been barred from entering for years now. But it's also about getting in the heavy machinery that's needed to clear rubble, to make more space for displacement sites, to dig drainage channels, because Gaza is very prone to flooding, and people are living very close to sea level and close to the sea. And so flooding has been a huge issue. Being able to mitigate and remove both sewage and trash and other solid waste. And so in order to do that, we need supplies, we need tools, we need heavy machinery. And that is not entering at all. And we need much more. And so people are freezing. We've already seen several babies die as a result of exposure this winter alone. We saw many die last year as well. We've seen people die as buildings have collapsed because people are trying so hard to stay out of tents and off the ground, that they're living in buildings that are just structurally unsound after so much destruction. And so we need to get in emergency shelter supplies. We need to see them entering at a scale that we have not seen. And we need to make sure that those supplies that are entering are up to humanitarian standards, because we've seen donor governments who have been trying to respond to the crisis, bringing in materials that aren't really suitable for the weather conditions in Gaza, and as a result require reinforcement with additional tarps if they aren't waterproof, and they really aren't fit for the harsh winters that people in Gaza face, where it's very windy, it's very rainy, and it's very cold.
Shana, is there still a big Israeli military presence in the areas where you are operating? Because under the terms of the ceasefire, the Israeli military was required to move east to a line east on the eastern side of Gaza.
We're only operating in the western part of Gaza, but of course we're still hearing about bombardments happening on a regular basis within those areas where most of the civilians in Gaza remain. And so even though our teams are not coming into direct contact, and the people that we serve in those areas are not coming into direct contact with Israeli forces, we're still seeing nearly daily violations of the ceasefire, where people are being killed either close to the yellow line, which demarcates where Israel has withdrawn, but also in the areas where Israel was supposed to withdraw, and the vast majority of civilians remain.
Claire, the World Health Organization warned that the health catastrophe in Gaza will last for generations. What are the main challenges that your doctors face right now?
Absolutely. And I think, building up on what has been said before, violence continues in Gaza very much on almost a daily basis, and it continues to kill and maim Palestinians. The population is really facing massive humanitarian needs and medical needs. What we see is that we continue to see a lot of people being injured, coming to our clinics. Either they've been recently injured or not, but come back for follow-up care. Burns patients as well come, and an increasing number of patients come because of infections or diseases linked to the dire and appalling living conditions. Very much, of course, linked to winter. We see an increase of respiratory diseases, but also gastric diseases and a lot of diarrhea. We also see malnutrition, continue to see malnourished children and pregnant and lactating mothers, and people coming because of the dire conditions. The health system has been nearly entirely destroyed after over 2 years of conflict, and the overwhelming majority of hospitals and health centers have been damaged or destroyed, and the ones which remain and continue to provide care to patients and provide so to a very high number of patients, and with not enough supplies because of the blockages that we were speaking about earlier. So it's really important that there is a scale up of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and therefore this announcement that registration will not be renewed to organizations that precisely do so, provide care to Palestinians, is a devastating blow, because it will leave hundreds of thousands of people without care. Just to give you an idea about what we do in Doctors Without Borders, in 2025 alone, we supported 1 in 5 hospital beds and 1 in 3 births. We basically carried out almost 800,000 outpatient consultations and managed over 100,000 trauma cases. We also did more than 10,000 deliveries and distributed over 700 million liters of water. And that's just for Doctors Without Borders. And we know that despite these critical activities, we're not doing nearly enough, and because of all the blockages put by the Israeli authorities. So it's really important to increase aid and not decrease it.
Shana, the United Nations World Food Programme says food supplies entering Gaza are not enough. Most families only get 1 meal a day. How dire is the situation, especially among children, most of whom, I would say, are suffering from malnutrition?
Well, the situation, as WFP has said, remains dire. I believe it's about 1 in 4 families that still is relying on only 1 meal per day. Our staff are still hungry, and even though we've seen an increase of commercial trucks entering, most people do not have an income and cannot afford the food that is entering. They simply cannot afford the prices, and that is why it's critical, in addition to restoring Gaza's markets, that humanitarian agencies are there and able to continue to respond, able to continue to provide food. At the Norwegian Refugee Council, we've started supporting bakeries in Gaza City, helping to subsidize the cost of bread so that people can afford it. And so rather than, as Claire said, rather than removing us, they should be allowing us at this point to scale up, because the needs remain dire. People are still hungry. People are still in need. And yet what we've seen is continuous obstruction over the last 2 years that simply has not stopped, despite calls not only from the UN, not only from the international NGO community, but from diplomats as well. And we need to see increased pressure put on Israel to lift these restrictions to ensure that Israel abides by its obligations under international law to facilitate impartial humanitarian relief. This, as Claire said, is not optional. This is their requirement. The International Court of Justice was very clear back in October with what Israel's obligations were, and that was to allow us to continue to work.
Shana, Claire, thanks for being with us. Gaza's health ministry says more than 400 Palestinians have been killed since the U.S.-brokered ceasefire was reached last October. On Monday, a 5-year-old girl and her uncle were killed in an airstrike that hit the tent they were sleeping in near Khan Yunis. Nasser Hospital says it also treated 2 young girls injured in the strike. Israel claims it was targeting a Hamas fighter. For more on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank, let's bring in our next guests. Joining us from Binyamina, Israel, is Maoz Inon. He's an Israeli peace activist who lost both his parents in the October 7th attacks and is the co-author of the forthcoming book, The Future is Peace, A Shared Journey Across the Holy Land. And Xavier Abu Eid is a political scientist and former advisor to the Palestine Liberation Organization. He joins us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Xavier, let me start with you. Israel continues its airstrikes on Palestinians in Gaza. According to Gaza officials, it has violated that ceasefire more than 900 times, and as we just reported, more than 400 Palestinians have been killed since that ceasefire was supposed to have been implemented. And as we just heard as well, the Israelis have suspended the licenses of 37 humanitarian aid organizations that have been providing critical care to Palestinians in Gaza. What does this signal to you about Israel's intention to honor that ceasefire?
First of all, thanks for having me here. I think this is not just about whether Israel wants to honor the ceasefire agreement or not. We have to remember that Benjamin Netanyahu was almost pushed into this ceasefire agreement. But I think it's something that's much bigger than just what's happening in Gaza. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu in October 2023, he set 5 fronts, he said, and then he said that they were going to fight in 7 fronts. And it's basically all fronts where Palestinians are, whether it's Gaza, the occupied West Bank, even Palestinian citizens of Israel. And therefore, what Benjamin Netanyahu has as an overall program, I would say, it's not even a strategy, is simply to deny the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. He will do that whether by destroying Gaza, whether by expanding settlements in the occupied West Bank, by denying access to humanitarian aid, by continuing the apartheid laws and regime in general against the Palestinian people. And therefore, what we are facing now in Gaza is not something new, but it's a continuation of policies we have faced for decades as Palestinians.
Maoz Inon, good to have you with us. The Israeli Prime Minister was recently in the United States. He held a meeting with President Trump. This is one of several meetings he's been holding since President Trump returned to office. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been talking about that meeting with President Trump in Israel. This is some of what he had to say. Let's listen.
He was unequivocal. He repeated it both in our internal conversations and in front of the public at the press conference there. He said the necessary condition is that Hamas disarms. There is no other option. This is a necessary and fundamental condition for implementing his 20-point plan. He made no concessions on this and showed no flexibility on this issue.
Now, Maoz, in addition to that call for Hamas to disarm, that settlement plan, that 20-point plan, also calls for the withdrawal of Israeli troops, the establishment of a technocratic government, and the start of reconstruction. Has the Israeli government set any kind of a deadline? Are there concerns that Israel is deliberately, intentionally delaying this peace process?
So I'm not a political analyst. I'm a peacemaker. And a peacemaker who lost both his parents on October 7th and choose as a personal healing but as an optional and alternative path for both people, Palestinians and Israelis, to choose reconciliation and partnership with Palestinians, with Israelis, and with peace supporters all over the world. And I don't need to listen to the Israeli Prime Minister, because I both, like all Palestinians, suffer from his actions and from his policies. And the policy of the Israeli government is very clear, and is not only not recognizing the self-determination of the Palestinians, it's also the existence of the Palestinians and their livelihood. So it's within the Israeli government policy to destroy Gaza, to ethnical cleansing all the Palestinians in Gaza, and they are doing the same also in the West Bank. And like my Palestinian partner that I missed your name just shared, also with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. So the war, the ceasefire is fake. The war is still continuing, and Israel is still continuing to break any international law and any humanitarian values or regulation, and we all suffer from it, and it doesn't matter. And I'm crying, and I cried since October 7th, yes, both for my parents and my Israeli friends who were killed during the Hamas attack, but for all the Palestinians that were killed before, during, and after, and we must stop it.
Maoz, I take your point about reconciliation as well as the search for peace, but despite the conditions which you have just described, you get the sense that there is a will, that there are elements within both sides that will seek reconciliation, as you point out, that will seek the peace that you are seeking.
Of course, there are many. I would dare to say the majority of Palestinians and Israelis are in favor of ending the bloodshed, ending the cycle of violence, fear, and hate that we've been trapped within for a century. But it's time now to act, not just to want it or wish for it. It's time to act and to prove once again that we as individuals, but as people, as humanity, can choose the path of peace and reconciliation, and not bloodshed, hate, war, and revenge.
Xavier, I want to turn to the West Bank right now, where the situation there has been deteriorating as well. Israeli forces are carrying out raids in the occupied West Bank, and according to a report in Middle East Eye, more than 21,000 Palestinians have been arrested over the past 2 years, and Palestinian officials say 230 Palestinians have been killed. That's just last year, 2025, in the occupied territory. Thousands, tens of thousands, have also been displaced. What can you tell us about conditions there?
I'm saying that people should understand that all of the occupied West Bank is under Israeli occupation. And when we talk about occupation, which is a term that comes under international law, the translation for everyone to understand is control. So Israel controls everything, the land and the people. And when I say the land and the people, it's not just about expansion of settlements. It's even about the population registry. It's even about with whom someone can get married. It's even in the sense of the import and export that someone can have. A very silly example I can give you is that I've been going to my local bookshop for the past almost 6 months, and they are not getting new books because Israel is preventing imports from Jordan through the Allenby Bridge. I mean, we are getting to that extent of control of the Israeli occupation. Now, they are the Israeli government policy in the occupied Palestinian territory, but particularly in the occupied West Bank, is about expanding as much as possible the control through annexation of the occupied territory as denounced by the International Court of Justice. So here, what we have is a combined policy where Israeli settlers, settler terrorists on one side, protected by Israeli occupation forces, plus Israeli occupation forces on the other side, they continue not just to take over Palestinian land, but also to demolish Palestinian homes and to spread terror all over the occupied territory, as, for example, yesterday took place at Birzeit University, the most important Palestinian university.
Maoz, Israel is also Going ahead with its settlement expansion, Israeli authorities plan to build more than 3,400 homes as part of what's known as the E1 project. That would effectively cut off north and south of the occupied West Bank, as well as parts of East Jerusalem. In fact, the Israeli government has just put out tenders or contracts for people to start building. It could be still some time before that starts, but what can you tell us about this? And I mean, how big a setback would this be to these efforts that groups like yours have been making to try and achieve peace, to try and get both sides to reach some kind of agreement?
So you stated the Israeli policy and plan just as I know them, and it's part of the Israeli policy that go on decades now to ethnical cleansing and control and occupy and oppress the Palestinian people, if they are in Gaza, if they are in the West Bank, and if they are citizens of Israel. And unfortunately, the state of Israel is not being sanctioned like they should be. They are not being sanctioned, and so they continuing with their policy and with their action with no accountability, and they just go on and doing it. And this is exactly when the international community must get involved, because the Palestinians are suffering from a oppressing regime and that controlling their life, their movement, the freedom of speech, freedom of gathering, political movement, of course, and options.
Sergio, one final thought on the situation in Gaza. In an op-ed piece which was posted on the Al Jazeera website, the Palestinian writer Iman Abu Zaid said that the ceasefire has made Gaza invisible. She writes, and I'm quoting directly here, "It became clear to me that the real goal of the ceasefire was not to stop the violence or death, nor to protect people or limit bloodshed and genocide. The real goal was to stop the world from talking about Gaza, about the crimes being committed there, and about the daily suffering of people." Does she have a point, Xavier? What's your assessment?
She has more than one point, and then I will also say that as Palestinians, we don't really have a ceasefire. We continue to live under a daily aggression by the Israeli army and by Israeli settlers. I would say that when the ceasefire agreement was pushed for, President Trump said that Benjamin Netanyahu should understand that Israel cannot fight the world alone. And I think what he tried to do was to take the pressure that was mounting from the international community, from the shifting of the international public opinion of Israel, in a way that they could continue policies against the Palestinian people, but not being held accountable by the international community. A lot of this pressure went off. And I would say that we are also being victims of a U.S. administration that really does not have much respect for international law, as we saw in Venezuela, and at the same time, does not really have a clear policy when it comes to this region. Therefore, what's happening in Gaza is a tragedy, and it's a continuation of a genocide. And overall, it's a continuation of the prospect that the Israeli government has to prevent the Palestinian people from its inalienable right to freedom and self-determination.
That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm your host, Arland Naidu, in Washington, D.C. If you have comments or questions you want us to follow up on, please leave a comment in the app or email heatpodcast@cgtnamerica.com. And if you'd like to support the show, the best way is simply to share it with someone who might enjoy it. See you next time.